This is a scene that I edited in Premiere Pro, and so are all of these. And while I don't hate After Effects, I show this to prove that the software you use to edit doesn't matter as much as most editors think. Because even if you learn After Effects, Blender, or any other software, none of it matters if you don't understand the principles that I'm going to show you in this video. So design is when you intentionally arrange elements to be both visually appealing and functional. So if we take this to its extreme, the best visuals would look amazing while also serving their purpose. And in a minute we'll jump into exactly how to create well-designed scenes, but it's really important we understand both parts of a well-designed edit. Because it was actually while I was sitting in a cafe, it was a Costa, and while I went to wash my hands, I turned the faucet on where it was one of these lever type of sinks. When I opened it, I realized I couldn't actually get the pressure of the water as high as I wanted, because when I tried to pull this lever as much as I can, the soap dispenser, the box on the wall, actually got in the way of the path of the lever, so it never opened as much as it could. And it was in that moment I remember telling myself these words: this is such a crappy design for a sink. And when I used the word design there, I realized it wasn't about the aesthetics that I was commenting on. It was that it didn't serve its purpose. It didn't turn on as much as I wanted it to turn on. So that's when I learned that design isn't just about being visually appealing, but it's also about functionality. But how do you actually make a functional edit? Well, the way I like to see this is a functional edit, a functional visual will be something that makes the video easier to understand and also makes the video more engaging. Because what you'll find is, while some editors try to make more complex and more crazier animations, it actually makes the video harder to understand. The perfect visual breaks down the context, makes it easier for the viewer to watch and understand what's going on while also looking cool. So let's jump into the 5 design principles that I've found out are essential to create well-designed scenes that are effective and look really good when you post them. Number 1 is composition. This is how things are placed on your screen. If you place things centrally or using something called rule of thirds, where you split your screen into third lines, you placing things either centrally or on these third lines will look more aesthetic than you randomly placing things however you feel. So it's by using these guidelines as well as considering how balanced your scene is, that's how you get great composition. The second dynamic principle is sizing. This is how big or small your elements are, but more specifically, how big or small they are relative to other elements. In general, you want to have the most important elements in a scene larger than the less important elements. So let's say you're editing a talking head video just like this one, and a person says 3 different points. They say, here are the 3 ways to make more money as an editor. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Instead of having the heading and the 3 points the same size or even closely the same size, you have the heading much bigger than the 3 points that you list. So having a hierarchy of how big or small elements are will really help in creating easy to understand scenes. The third design principle is spacing. This is how far each element is from each other. Now you want to make sure that when you are spacing elements apart from each other, if they're supposed to be the same distance away from each other, make sure you actually make them the same distance away from each other. Inconsistent spacing and unalignment, disalignment, whatever the word is, it looks so horrendous and it's such an amateur mistake that a ton of editors leave in. So make sure you pay attention to how far elements are away from each other and make it even if it's supposed to be even. Design principle number 4 is color. This is how you use hue, saturation, and lightness in order to create emotion and contrast within your scene. Hue is what most people think of when they're thinking of color. It's red, blue, green, orange, that sort of thing. Saturation is sort of like how vibrant is this color? How grayed out is it? Lightness is how white or black is it? How bright or dark is this color? And by combining these 3 principles of color, you can actually create any color you want. So how do you know what colors to use in a scene? Well, first of all, you want to ask yourself, within this context, what colors make sense? So for example, if you're editing a game show and someone just won a round, what color do you think should be prevalent? You've got green flashes, maybe you put the score in green so that you can show they just gained a point. What if you're editing a gaming video and they just lost the challenge or they just died? You could use red. Do you see how the context of what we're editing will affect the colors that we use? As well as considering the emotion and context when it comes to color, you also want to think about how can we create as much contrast as possible between different layers. So if you have a background that's super bright, that's completely fine. But if the elements in front are also super bright, there's not going to have any contrast. So what you can do is have elements that contrast in hue. So maybe a purple foreground and a yellow background, or the other way around. Maybe you could have contrast with saturation, where the foreground stays saturated and the background you desaturate just to get rid of the focus in the background. Color is something where, as well as creating emotion, you can create a ton of depth, which leads us onto the fifth design principle, which is depth. Now, depth is all about creating this illusion of a 3D space, even if it's in a 2D edit. Now, whether you're editing 2D scenes, 3D scenes, it doesn't matter what dimension you're working in. If you don't have this depth principle in place, it will just look flat and as if you just started plastering on and stickering on scenes. And honestly, I could go into depth for hours, and I did. So if you go watch this video here, it'll break down how I actually create depth within edits, so you can go watch that right here.